Um, Hi, and thank you so much for being here today, Keziah. It's really, really lovely to meet you. And we're here to just consider the role that nannies play within the family and how that might be impacted by the death of a parent in particular.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. So yeah, I am a nanny and I have worked for a family for 7 years, and last year we lost my boss to cancer, and she left behind her 2 children who were 8 and 10 at the time. And it was just a whole thing, because we just, as a nanny, you're not trained for it. You don't know how to handle a bereavement. In general, I don't think anyone's prepared for a bereavement. And when you're in a professional capacity, you want to care for the children and everyone in your environment in a really professional way. But I had no idea what I was doing. And so I just think if there was an element of figuring out how to support nannies in the best possible way to support everyone else, it would be a really cool and amazing resource. And opening up a conversation about it, I think, is the starting point. And chatting with Winston's Wish is amazing, just to remind people that there are other professionals in a big bereavement like that. And yeah, it's really exciting to be discussing it.
Absolutely, it's a really important area, and just as a bit of background for Winston's Wish, we were the first child bereavement charity established in the UK back in 1992, and have really kind of tried to find the best way that we can to reach as many children as we can since then. And we like many others have had to adapt the way that we offer support because of the pandemic. But we offer support to children and young people following the death of a parent or sibling. But most importantly, whilst we offer the support directly to the children and young people, we also consider the people around them as well. And whilst that's quite often family members, it's also professionals as well involved with them. And I guess your role kind of is very much embedded in the family, as well as on the professional side as well. Yeah,
so
absolutely. So it's a really different role.
Professional capacity.
So when we work with both family members and professionals, when either there's been a death already, or perhaps somebody they know is going to die, and we're thinking about how best to support the children, there's lots and lots of ways in to Winston's Wish, and we have our national helpline, and that's used almost as much by professionals as it is by family members, just to be able to, like you say, open up those conversations, which is so important, and start to think about what's happening, what the children understand, and how you in your role might be best placed to support them. And obviously, those conversations are great to have, because the children a lot better than we do, and so you'd be able to offer some unique perspective into what sounds like it might work for them as individuals, and what might feel like it doesn't quite fit for them at that moment in time. And obviously, for children that are a little bit older and they want to access us directly, we've got a website for children and young people, and we've got our and that's called Help to Make Sense, and we've got email and live chat that they can access, and lots and lots of resources on our website as well, because often it's diagnoses or deaths can happen quite suddenly, and we really recognise the need for people to have information as easily and as quickly as possible, and so we have information for parents, carers as well, that particularly for professionals if they wanted a little bit more, and I don't know what might have been helpful from your perspective, or what do you think would be helpful from Nanny's perspective?
Well, I found Winston's Wish an invaluable resource. I 100% it was one of the first places I'd been recommended to go and have a look when I was told about my boss's diagnosis and prognosis in general. It was the first place I went, and the books for children, incredible, all the packages. Just for a nanny's perspective, it was hard because I had to jump between looking at what the parents might be reading and then what a professional might be reading, and then combining the two. It is tricky. It's more time consuming in any sense, but all the information is 100% there and accessible, and like you said, at your fingertips, like, because these things happen so suddenly and you just aren't prepared, and then all of a sudden you need to be prepared and have some sort of idea. And Winston's Wish 100% have all the information. It's just spread out among the two different places, but that is because of the role of a nanny is two different areas. It's so personal, but then the nanny plays such a professional role for themselves. It's finding a right mix, like a right hybrid mix of the two, but it isn't, you have the resources there. It's just, I found it harder to be able to figure out what goes where from me, but again, it's dependent on the families and the situation, and it's just finding the right mix, really. But that was my main struggle on caring for my charges and figuring out the best possible care plans for both of them, because I was going back and forth to mum and dad and supporting them with this horrible discussions with the children and those really hard conversations, and then I was trying to make sure that everything we were talking about to the children was age and stage appropriate and on a level that they'd understand. And going back and forth between the two areas, just I found it really hard just to make sure I was had the right hat on during the right conversation, because I could discuss it one way with the mum and dad on more of a blunt level, on just a more realistic level, and then to the children it was a bit more a slower paced explanation and on their level. And going between the two hats, it was quite hard just to gauge on how to discuss it with the children, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It does sound like a really challenging role in that circumstance, you know, and like you say, having to sift through the different bits of information to find the best fit, because like you say, it's a hybrid role in many respects. It's a combination of lots of different information. And I mean, we've been mindful as well that the pandemic has obviously had a big impact on the way in which people have been able to express their grief and the way in which they were supported as well. And certainly what we've heard from families that that we're working with is you know, how isolating an experience it was in many respects. And you know, all those I mean, the family spoke a lot about physical contact as well, you know, really just needing a hug. And obviously that was one of the things that was hugely restrictive during the lockdown periods. And the fact that schools were closed, that for children would have been an important source of support. And I know that schools did a fantastic job with online support, but it is different. It's different. And certainly, you know, the way in which people were able to process their grief and think about what was happened, you know, that was all quite well, potentially intensified because of the lockdown restrictions, and for some children that you know, that's led to more complex issues, and for others not as much. And I know families as well that have said we really valued the time together as a family, actually, that lockdown gave us. So there were positives as well, but I know that there have been challenges. And one of the things that we have tried to do as an organisation when the pandemic first hit, and continue to do now, is offer I guess as much online support as we possibly can, so that people can reach us regardless of the lockdown situation. And as well as online resources, but also recognising, you know, the people like having that face-to-face contact as well. I guess that must have been a challenge, and I don't know if you know, nannies working during the pandemic, even if they weren't experiencing a loss or bereavement, perhaps had challenges in their role, and as well as the possibility of COVID being around, possibly impacting on people's health, and how best to offer support at such a difficult time.
Well, my charges lost their mum during the pandemic, and we've looked at it, we've actually discussed it and debriefed on it quite a lot over the last year, and we found that we valued the time together so much. That was one of the benefits of the pandemic, if there were a benefit of the pandemic. But it meant that the children were home with their mum for the lead up until her death, and that's time they would have been at school. That's time they wouldn't have been able to have those lunches and hang out with her and see her. So for us, that was a really special time. But it was also really hard because the children's personal support systems, their friends, their teachers, their safe space at school wasn't a safe space anymore. There wasn't a safe space for them to go. They were contained in a house that had a looming sadness, a heaviness on it. And for them, it was a really hard transition for a few months of just being in a house where they couldn't escape. We could go to the playground, but for an hour a day, and they were somewhat trapped in a situation that we didn't want them to be in. We wanted them to be children and see their friends and be able to take their mind off the situation at home. And the pandemic really put a dampness on that. And I know schools were incredible. Both my charges' schools were amazing. And they came up with contingency plans, and teachers would come and stand at the end of the driveway to chat to the kids to make sure they were okay. But it just was really different and difficult for them. But then at the same time, they had that extra time with their mum. So I don't know how to explain it. It's just a lot. The pandemic was a lot on every level for every different emotion. But and then it was when their mum died, like they couldn't even go to the hospital. And they couldn't hug each other. They couldn't go and see their aunties or uncles or their friends who loved their mum, who wanted to tell the children how much they loved her. They couldn't have that physical touch or conversation without a mask. The pandemic was an absolute nightmare, but a weird blessing at the same time. And for me personally, I moved in with my bosses when she was diagnosed, and it became, with the COVID, she was very high risk. So I moved in just to eliminate any risk of me bringing anything into the house. And so the same principles for the children, of them having their safe space at home or at school with their friends. I was kind of in a position where I was in the house 24/7 in a situation that was just heavy and hard and a lot. So I ended up having my professional hat on a lot, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, how do I answer this question? They've said something today. How do I answer it? And as you said, having a resource at your end of your fingertips, as in having the online things set up by Winston's Wish, they were really helpful. Being able to go, okay, I can Google this and it will come up with something, or I know Winston's Wish will have a book on how to discuss this, or how to do a box of memories with mummy. It was a really good blessing as well in general, that everyone, all these charities that support children in situations like this, were able to set up something that would be able to be accessed at all times. And from a professional perspective, having these resources at the end of your fingertips is amazing, because you can just go, okay, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to find out, and I'll be back with you in 2 minutes, and be able to give them a really knowledgeable perspective because you've researched it and it's come up and there's information and help on the end of the website. So yeah, lots of blessings in disguises, but awful in general.
Absolutely. And I think it's really good to hear that the resources were helpful, but actually, I think your earlier point of being able to open up this conversation of the unique role that nannies do play in a family, and how we as an organisation might be able to offer some additional help and support might it be really useful. I mean, I know one of my colleagues recently wrote an article for the BAPN to sort of outline some of the needs of bereaved children, and it's something that we'd like to continue working with them on, to develop more resources that can be more tailored, I guess, so that you don't have to do that sifting through and trying to pick out important bits from both, that it would be all there from your own perspectives, and that feels really, really important in itself. I mean, I know I've certainly worked with families whereby some people like printed copies of our books, and we try to tailor our books so that they can meet the developmental needs of the children and young people. So we've got Never Too Young to Grieve for the under fives, we've got You Just Don't Understand for the teenagers, we've got a child's grief, which kind of encompasses that middle childhood range, and equally, though, those are great resources to have, but sometimes it's good to have something downloadable as well, or a video. Sometimes it's good to have the conversation, or drop an email, and just so it's really tailored to a specific circumstance. Is there anything else in your mind that would have been particularly useful during that time?
Like, as I said, as an open discussion, because I think for nannies in general, you don't go into a working environment in a house with a family thinking that someone might die, or even having any understanding that someone could die or get very sick. It's just not on your radar, and it's a very taboo conversation. I think just opening it up to remind people that death is inevitable in our lives. It's just something we're all going to have to deal with and have to work through. And why don't we all know a bit more about it anyway? Because we're all going to have to support someone or go through it ourselves. Having that conversation on a professional level and on a personal level, people, I think, just need to have resources and information on people dying and how to support your friends and your family and your employers. It's so common that even in a workplace and an office, that your boss could be off sick, because off on or compassionate leave because someone has passed away. And then having those conversations, having those discussions, and being able to go, I'm really sorry for your loss, and acknowledging someone's died, rather than feeling like a big elephant in the room with not saying anything. I think just opening that platform and discussing it, and just reminding people that it's completely normal, and allowing people the chance to absorb some information, so that one day, if they are in a situation, regardless if they're working for a family, because I know nannies, they're not the most common thing for everyday families, but in general, everyone is going to have to support someone through a bereavement, whether it's their friends, families, employers, neighbours, anyone, just everyone having a better understanding and being able to go into it with a bit more clarity and understanding on how to just be a nice person, to just support someone. I think that would be really, really helpful.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head then. Talking about it is so important, and I think and that might just be acknowledging that somebody's died, or it might be offering help and support depending on the situation and your relationship with them. But I think we often get asked what one bit of advice would you give, what one nugget, and it's really hard to give just one bit of advice. And but certainly what we know for children, it is so hard, because children's level of understanding, as you've already touched on, varies massively depending on their developmental age and stage, and therefore how to talk to children about death. It really varies as well. But what we often say is don't be afraid to have those difficult conversations with children, and it can be tailored to meet their specific needs. But those conversations are really important. Even if they don't want to talk about it at that moment, they still get the message that it's okay to talk about difficult things, rather than keeping it all inside. And also, we talk a lot with adults who are supporting children, whether that's in a personal or a professional capacity, not just about having those conversations, but also about looking after themselves, which is so important. And it's so easy for adults to forget about themselves when they're thinking so much about the children and their own needs. And so whenever we're doing training days, whenever we're talking to families on our helpline or through email or live chat or whatever, we always touch on that one as well, because it feels so important that that, you know, they're not going to be in a position to offer the best support if they're not okay themselves. So it is a fine balance between the children's needs, the adults' needs, and how to open up those conversations, how to start. And like you say, you don't have to make them big conversations. It might just be the touch of a shoulder, are you okay today? Or it might be, I'm here if you want to talk. Lots and lots of different ways around that, but yeah, that feels like a really important message, so thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about today?
I actually don't know. I think we've covered all my main talking points. I'm just really happy that a conversation is being had, because I always feel nannies are like a weird forgotten profession, that because we're so integrated into a family life, you kind of forget someone's there and that they have feelings and they need support on how to care for their family. Because I felt I was like a weird not a totem pole, like a tent pole. I was a weird tent pole, holding up the family house and just keeping everything going, keeping the routines and doing lots of information to everyone about all the things and all the balls, juggling all the balls, that if I fell, the house would fall and the kids would fall and the mum and dad would fall, and it would just be a horrible disaster. And it got to the point where I kind of got a little bit burnt out, and it was something that I then have now reflected on and gone, I shouldn't have been pouring from an empty cup. And that's what I was doing at one point. And then I was able to take a few days, stay in my bed, chill out and regroup. And then I went in with a fresh head, and I was able just to decompartmentalize and go away at night time and go, okay, my work hat is off, and take some time for myself, and then go back in again with fresh eyes and be the best that I can be for the children in my care and their parents and my situation. And the pandemic obviously made that really hard, because I moved in with my bosses. But you just got to take time for yourself, and it's not just a bereavement, like in a personal, professional way. For me, my boss was my friend, and I was there for 7 years. I've been here for 7 years. And so I lost her as much as my charge has lost her, but on a completely different level, obviously. But it was still a bereavement nonetheless, and I was still grieving. But it was really magical, because the children were the ones that showed me and the children's dad how to grieve and how they were doing it, and they just marched on and carried on, and they led the way on the way we've handled everything, and every decision and every step of their grief, it's been down to them, and they've led the way in such a way that is just magical. They're just amazing. Children are resilient and amazing, and my charges have surprised me in more ways than one, because they've just been incredible. Other than that, I cannot say how amazing they've been, and it's been a really, really interesting learning curve for me on how I've been taught by my charges. I'm not the one teaching them. They've taught me on how to feel and how to grieve and how to keep the ball going, keep the carousel turning, just carry on, and it's been incredible.
I mean, that feels like a really good message to end on. Absolutely, children are incredibly resilient with the right levels of support, and it sounds like the family were really lucky to have you as that tent pole, as you said, supporting both another family.